He was fortunate enough to have a camera, and he shared, went out and tried to capture what was there in the city at that time.
It's said Robert Johnson knelt at the crossroads at midnight, and when he rose, his soul was no longer his own. From then on, his guitar rang out like the devil's cry, like a tattered soul begging for release. Those who heard it shuddered, swearing they saw a shadow standing behind him as he played. And now the remaining evidence might keep you awake, because it's too real, too brutal to be mere legend. Before you step with me into that horrific secret, don't forget to like, subscribe, and prepare yourself, because once you hear it, you'll never listen to the blues the same way again. They say in Mississippi in the 1910s, there was a boy who often sat on the porch, closing his eyes to listen to the wind threading through the trees as if it were a melody only he could hear. His name was Robert Johnson, a name that would shake the entire music world, but at that time, no one believed he was capable of anything grand. In the eyes of the world, Robert was just a skinny, dark-skinned child, forever dreaming amidst the stark white cotton fields, the most brutal contrast the American South could then produce. Robert was born in 1911 into a family all too familiar with instability. His mother, Julia Major Dodds, had to leave their former home due to unspoken laws, the kind of laws that forced people to divide every breath of freedom. Mother and son moved from one region to another, never staying put for long. At every place she passed through, Julia left a piece of herself, a bit of hope, a bit of fear. As for Robert, he learned to memorize the sounds of each region, from the murmuring of the Mississippi to the grating of wagon wheels on the dirt roads of Memphis. In Memphis, the strangest thing happened. Robert went to school. At that time, this was almost unheard of for a child like him. But it was there that he began reading poems, understanding musical theory, and learning to organize sounds into emotions. In class, Robert was quiet, but whenever there was music, his eyes lit up. His teacher recounted that he had an exceptional memory. He could recall a melody immediately, even if he had heard it only once. But no one expected that the child with such acute hearing was also a terrible guitar player. He tried, but his strumming sounded like a wound that wouldn't close. The strings were slack, the rhythm off, the melodies so distorted that listeners burst into laughter. In the small roadside juke joints, where people gathered after a long, weary day, everyone shook their heads. That boy has no future in music. A childhood friend later recounted, he just sat there picking. No matter who told him to stop, he kept playing, as if he stopped, his heart would instantly break. Perhaps that very stubbornness was Robert Johnson's salvation. While others treated music as mere fun, he saw it as the only way to exist. Music for Robert wasn't joy. It was the only way to survive in a world that had no place for him. Robert's childhood was a string of days spent among weary laborers, the mournful singing in the cotton fields, and stories told in the rough voices of those who had tasted suffering. The music born from tears and resilience seeped into his blood without him knowing when. But when he started to play, everyone saw clearly. Robert didn't just want to play music, he wanted something more. He wanted to find a sound the world had never heard. Then one day, he vanished. No one knew where he went. They only saw him carrying his old guitar, walking away into the smoke-hazed sunset. Some said he went to apprentice, others that he followed a strange teacher. There were also rumors that he left out of shame from being ridiculed too much. Whatever the reason, his disappearance made people forget him for a long while. When Robert returned, everything was different. He was no longer the shy, clumsy boy. There was something in his eyes, deep, still, and distant. People said he looked like he had just returned from a very distant place, where a person could shed their fear and bring back something supernatural. And then, when Robert picked up his guitar, everyone fell silent. The music poured out, not the sound of someone who used to miss notes, but of someone who commanded every breath of the strings. The melodies glided through the air like something alive, natural, yet seductive. A seasoned local player exclaimed, "That can't be the old Robert. It just can't." Perhaps because no one could believe it, they started looking for an explanation. And as always, when people don't understand something, they create a legend. People said Robert went somewhere, met someone, learned something, but no one knew for sure. The more vague it was, the more captivating the story became. And from that point, Robert Johnson's name began appearing in juke joints, on the road, and on the lips of music aficionados. They spoke of him with a mixture of admiration and fear. He didn't just play the guitar, he forced people to confront something deep within themselves, hidden sorrows, fears, and desires. Robert didn't speak much about the transformation. He just smiled whenever someone asked about his playing secret. "Just listen a little closer," he'd reply. "The music is always there, people just aren't patient enough to hear it." That answer left many both curious and unsettled, because listening closer sometimes means listening to things people don't want to hear. The sound of loneliness, the sound of loss, the vague call of something beyond reach. One person once recounted that one night he heard Robert play a song whose sound seemed lost in another realm. I don't know why, but when he played, the wind stopped. Everyone stood still. It was like the whole world had to pause to listen. A few people claimed they saw Robert's shadow lengthen, swaying with the lamplight. Perhaps it was just the lighting. Perhaps it was something else. No one could be sure. Day by day, Robert became quieter. He spoke less, smiled less, and often walked alone. Some said he was running from something. Others suggested he was searching for another sound, a sound beyond the human realm. Whatever it was, he never stopped. In his entire life, Robert Johnson only recorded 29 songs. But each song is a fragment of a soul, a confession never fully spoken. Every note he played seemed to contain all the pain, the solitude, and the desire for recognition. Something society at the time was too rigid to grant a person like him. Blues, for Robert, was not just music, it was the voice of people who had been forced into silence. And perhaps that's why when he played, everyone who listened felt their heart tighten, not out of fear, but out of empathy. They recognized in that guitar sound not just the story of one man, but the solitude of an entire generation. Robert Johnson, the boy who was ridiculed for hitting wrong notes, made the whole world stop and listen. But in the light of his music, people forgot one thing. What made that music great wasn't magic, but a profound loneliness etched so deeply it transformed into genius. The sun had just set behind the trees, leaving a blood-tinged sky and a wisp of mist hovering over the southern fields. The heat of the summer day gradually dissolved, giving way to a strange chill crawling across the rows of grass. Robert Johnson walked across the vast open land, his old guitar slung over his shoulder. No one knew where he was going. People only said that for weeks he had been walking, wandering from town to town, his eyes distant as if summoned by something. Those who met him recalled that his voice grew softer, his smile faded, with only his hands constantly fiddling with the fretboard, as if it were the only thread connecting him to the world. The red dirt road leading to Clarksdale stretched endlessly. Night descended quickly and thickly, as if someone had extinguished the lights in the sky. Robert did not stop. Each step crunched on the cracked, dry earth, the wind whistling past his ears, merging with his heavy breathing. He had heard about a place where two main roads intersected, Highway 61 and Highway 49. People called it the crossroads. Everyone embellished the story a little, but the common thread was that place held something unusual, something beyond human comprehension. An old guitar player once told him, half-jokingly, "If you want to learn to play like that, you got to meet the man at the crossroads." Robert smiled, but a strange light flickered in his eyes. Perhaps that very sentence had haunted him, making him decide to seek it out. Because he had tried, he had practiced, he had played until his fingertips bled, yet he still could not achieve the sound he heard in his head, a sound that did not belong to this world. That night, the wind picked up abruptly, carrying the scent of damp earth and burnt liquor. Distant crickets chirped incessantly, like an orchestra for an impending ritual. When Robert arrived at the junction, the clock had struck midnight. There were no lights, no people, only two roads cutting through the desolate fields, stretching into endless darkness. He stopped, looking around. Everything was dead silent. Only the slow beating of his heart and the faint sound of guitar strings as the wind brushed past. Robert placed the guitar on the ground. He sat down, bowing his head, as if praying to something that even he didn't understand. The mist surrounded him, thickening into hazy, smoke-like layers. Then, a single step sounded behind him. He turned around. A man stood there. It was unclear where he came from. No sound of a vehicle, no footsteps, simply appearing as if stepping out of the darkness. He was tall, dark, and silent. The faint light from the new moon shone on his face, but no one could clearly discern his features. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, a long coat sweeping the ground, and his eyes, or the glint in his sockets, seemed to stare right through Robert. The stranger said nothing. He simply reached out a hand, signaling Robert to hand over the guitar. Robert's hand trembled, but he complied. The man took the guitar, examined it for a moment, then began to retune the strings. Each time he turned a tuning peg, the sound resonated, echoing in the night, as if the ground itself vibrated along. Then he played. The music began, soft, low, and so profound it took the listener's breath away. It was not a human melody. It carried all the crying, the laughter, the screaming, and the pleading. Robert sat motionless. He felt as if every string was etching deeply into his heart, every note rewriting his soul. When the stranger stopped, the air seemed to solidify. He handed the guitar back, then leaned down, saying something very small, very faint. No one heard it, and even Robert wasn't sure if it was a voice or just an echo in his mind. Immediately after, the stranger turned and walked away, slowly disappearing into the shadows. Robert stood there for a long time, not daring to breathe deeply. The night was still thick, but the wind was gone. He tightly gripped the guitar in his hands, then tried to pluck a note. Just one note, but the sound was distant, clear, sharp, and rich enough to make him shudder. He played a few more notes, then a passage, then an entire song. As the music flowed out, everything around him seemed to awaken. It was no longer just sound, but emotion, swirling, grasping at the heart. He played non-stop until his hands trembled, cold sweat soaking his shirt. When dawn broke, Robert returned to town. Those who knew him couldn't believe their eyes. The clumsy man who used to miss every beat now held the guitar with a strange confidence. He sat down, strummed a few chords, and the whole room fell silent. His guitar playing sounded like two people playing at once, one hand keeping the yaar rhythm, the other playing the soul. One rhythm of the earth, one rhythm from somewhere else. People looked at each other, astounded. "It's impossible," one whispered. "It can't be the same person." The rumor spread quickly. In the juke joints, at the markets, in the distant fields, people began talking about Robert Johnson, the man who left an ordinary town and returned with music from another realm. Some said he met a spirit, others said he met the devil himself. As for Robert, he said nothing. Whenever asked, he just smiled, his eyes showing a hint of sadness. Later, people learned he had been living with Ike Zimmerman, a seasoned guitar player who lived on the outskirts. Neighbors recounted that every evening they would see the two leaving the house, carrying guitars, heading deep into the woods. They only returned near dawn. Some curious individuals followed, only to return shaking. They sat in the middle of a graveyard to play, the person said, where the sound carried further and clearer than anywhere else. No one knows why Zimmerman chose that spot, but some rumored he believed that among the graves the souls of the dead would listen, and if the living were brave enough, they could learn how to make the guitar speak the language of darkness. Robert followed suit, utterly unafraid. In the moonlight, he sat among the cold gravestones, listening to every breath of the night, every echo from the depths of the earth. And then his guitar playing was changed forever. Locals began to whisper, "Johnson learned to play with the ghosts." An old woman in Clarksdale even said she saw his silhouette sitting in the graveyard, facing a tall man whose back was turned to her, holding a guitar. She said, "I knew he wasn't alive. that shadow, it didn't touch the ground. As the story spread, people began to fear. They loved that music, but at the same time, they felt chills whenever they heard it, because in every melody there was something like a wail, like a call from a place without light. Everyone who heard Robert play alone said they felt the presence of someone else, another breath, another life intruding into every note. One night in a packed juke joint, just as Robert finished a song, a drunken man stumbled over, clapped him on the shoulder, and laughed maniacally. "They say you met someone at the crossroads, is that right?" Robert just remained silent, his eyes distant. The yellow lamplight cast stark contrasts of light and shadow on his face. The other man laughed. If that's true, he must have been worth it. Robert didn't reply. He simply lifted his guitar, strummed a chord sequence, and everything went silent. The music resonated like wind howling through an abandoned church. When the piece ended, no one dared to say another word. The drunk stood still, his face pale. From then on, no one dared to tease him. But the rumor never stopped. People told each other that at that crossroads, if you go exactly at midnight and call Robert Johnson's name, you might hear a guitar faintly echoing from somewhere, distant, weak, but real. Some said it was his ghost teaching others. Others said it was a warning. Don't go there unless you're ready to trade. As for Robert, every time he passed the crossroads, he always paused for a moment. He bowed his head, his fingers lightly touching the strings as if greeting an old friend. No one knew what he thought in that moment, but every time he stood up, his eyes deepened, as if containing an abyss that others could never understand. People could doubt, they could laugh, they could spread rumors, but no one denied. After that night in Clarksdale, Robert Johnson was no longer the same man. What he played, whether blues, ballad, or a meaningless riff, made people believe that something beyond human control was commanding that guitar. And from then on, that phrase spread like a curse. If you want to learn to play like that, you got to meet the man at the crossroads. It is said that after that night, Robert Johnson never slept soundly again. Every time the moonlight shone through the window, he would wake up, reach for his guitar beside him, play a note, then two, then a whole long piece, as if trying to escape his own dreams. Perhaps that's why, when he began appearing all over the American South, from Mississippi to Arkansas, then Texas, Memphis, and even Chicago, his music sounded like a confession, like the last breath of a soul that had seen what shouldn't be seen. Robert traveled relentlessly. Everywhere he went, all he needed was his guitar and a wooden stool to command the entire room into silence. Juke joint patrons, farmers, laborers, sex workers, and even idle policemen all sat still when the music started. Every note seemed to tear through the air, and in that moment, people forgot the smell of sweat, the smoke, and even the unpaid debts. All they were left with was the blues, the music that made listeners both want to cry and want to believe that their pain was being sung by someone who understood them to their very core. But among those captivated audiences, there was always an intangible feeling, something unreal, as if Robert wasn't singing for them, but singing to summon someone else. Every time he raised his voice, it felt like he was pleading or running from something no one could see. He sang like he was running from something, or someone who heard him in Arkansas once said. And perhaps he was right. Among the songs that sent the most chills, Crossroad Blues was always mentioned first. Right from the opening line, his voice sounded like a swirling dust devil. I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. No one listened without feeling a prickle of fear. People began to discuss. Was it the truth? Was he recounting that very fateful night at the junction that everyone only dared to whisper about? Those who witnessed Robert perform all said he was uncanny. He didn't smile, didn't talk, just polite enough for everyone to feel his distance. In life, he was so quiet, he was almost separate. No one understood what he was thinking. But when the lights in the juke joint dimmed, when the noise of the crowd faded into the background, Robert transformed into another person. He bowed his head, his hair falling to cover half his face, then began to play. His music wasn't simply music, it was something deeper, heavier, as if each note was a scar plucked until it bled. Every lyric he sang seemed to contain a confession, and each time he finished, he would sit still, cold sweat on his neck, his eyes vacant. People said that when he played, no one could clearly see his face. The light in the juke joint suddenly seemed strange, as if deliberately shrinking, only exposing his hands moving frantically on the fretboard. Many asserted they only saw his shadow, the shadow swaying, long and distorted, as if separating from his body to dance to the music. Me and the Devil Blues made everything worse. When he sang, "Early this morning, when you knocked upon my door," everyone fell silent. People said he wasn't just singing, but telling, as if someone had genuinely knocked on his door that morning, as if the meeting at the crossroads hadn't ended, but was still ongoing, haunting every gig, every note. And "Hellhound on My Trail," the song people considered the darkest, sounded like the moan of someone perpetually hunted. "And the blues falling down like hail," he sang with a hoarse and trembling voice, making listeners feel like they were witnessing a soul being dragged down, yet desperately fighting back. Those who traveled with him recounted that Robert often sat alone after each performance, isolated from everyone, his eyes distant. Some said he was replaying the music in his head, others said he was listening to the whispers of something only he could hear. Whatever the case, no one dared to approach him, not because they were afraid of him, but because they feared the silence surrounding him, a thick silence, as if breaking it would reveal an echo from a place no one wanted to touch. Throughout his years of wandering, the rumor of a deal spread like fire across dry fields. Everywhere he set foot, people added a detail. Some said he knelt on the ground to exchange his soul. Others claimed he just had to leave his guitar in the road and wait for someone to pick it up. Every story was different, but all pointed to one thing: the strange coincidence between his lyrics, his lifestyle, and his surreal talent. No one had proof, but no one dared to assert the opposite. Someone once asked him directly, "Robert, they say you signed a deal with the devil, right?" He just shrugged, smiled faintly, and replied, "I only play what I hear." That brief answer didn't reassure people. It only made them believe more strongly that, indeed, he heard something ordinary humans could not. One night in Texas, while playing a segment of Crossroad Blues, his guitar string suddenly snapped. The snap echoed in the silent space, but Robert didn't stop. He continued playing, as if the guitar was whole. The person sitting closest swore they could still hear the full melody, not missing a single note, and the sound was even stronger, deeper, making people both frightened and unable to turn away. When the song ended, Robert simply looked at the broken string, smiled, and reattached it as if nothing had happened. From then on, no one dared to sit too close to him when he performed. Between his travels, Robert left few traces. No diary, no letters, no confidences. Only the music, like fragments of his soul scattered along the road. Every time he left a town, people spoke of an indescribable emptiness, as if something had just arrived, turned everything upside down, and vanished without a goodbye. In the dim light of southern juke joints, Robert was more of a silhouette than a real person. He walked onto the stage, sat down, the guitar on his lap, and bowed his head. All in a few seconds, but people felt he vanished into the darkness. When the music began, no one remembered their surroundings. They only heard the wailing of wood, the sustained ringing of metal, and a voice that seemed to come from the deepest part of a scorched heart. People said Robert had two personas. One was the quiet, polite, composed man in life, always bowing, always keeping his distance. The second was the other person, spectral, unrestrained, fierce, who only appeared when he held the guitar. The line between these two selves was so fragile that he himself seemed unaware of who he was. Some nights he sat talking to himself, his eyes fixed on the void as if expecting a reply. And in the silence, people saw his lips move, as if apologizing to someone unseen. The further he went, the greater his fame grew. But simultaneously, the fear around him grew too. No one knew the truth, only that his music was unlike anyone else's. Every blues track he wrote sounded like the diary of a soul bound by an unfulfilled promise. Listeners weren't just hearing music, they were hearing the breath of fate. Everything he touched, lyrics, melody, gaze, gesture, made people believe there was a secret behind it, something he didn't say, but always revealed through his music. And that very silence made the legend flare up more fiercely than any story. Although no one ever saw a document signing a deal, although there were no witnesses, no evidence, people still believed. Because there was no way to explain how someone once dismissed as playing soullessly could transform into a genius after such a short time. They couldn't accept that it was hard work or luck. They needed another reason, something more supernatural, more terrifying. And so, the shadow of the man at the crossroads grew ever larger, engulfing Robert's very name. As for him, whenever he sang, he bowed his head low, his voice hoarse, trembling. And sometimes, if you paid close attention, you could see his lips pressing together mid-sentence, as if trying to hold back something. As if the lyrics were not only his, but the echo of another entity, still demanding its share in that melody. Robert Johnson, the wanderer with the guitar, made the entire South shiver. Because what he carried was not just music, but the question no one dared to answer. When a man sings as if he's running, then ultimately, who is he running from? That night, Robert Johnson's guitar rang out across the farmland in Greenwood, sharp and mesmerizing. People said he had never sung so well. Crossroad blues resonated like a confession, his voice cracking, trembling. But there was something in the way he played that silenced everyone, as if they were listening to someone who knew this would be the final song. After the performance, Robert lingered with a few acquaintances. A woman approached, her face both gentle and worried. Everyone knew she was the farm owner's wife. Their eyes met, vaguely but dangerously. Not long after, the husband appeared, holding a bottle of liquor, his smile faint and chilling. He poured a glass and offered it directly to Robert. Someone attempted to stop him, but Robert simply nodded, lifted the glass, and drained it. That small amount of liquor, people claimed, was the start of something no one dared to articulate. Less than an hour later, Robert staggered away from the light, clutching his stomach, his breathing labored. Everyone thought he was drunk. But by morning, faint groans came from the small shack behind the farmhouse. For several days, he writhed in an unnamed agony. No doctor, no medicine, only helpless friends watching. In his delirium, he murmured the familiar lyric, "You may bury my body down by the highway side." The song sounded like a prophecy, as if he knew where he would be laid to rest. No one knows exactly what killed Robert Johnson. Some say he was poisoned out of jealousy. Others suggest he had an existing illness that only manifested then. But many believed the Crossroads deal had come due. They whispered that he was given talent by a dark shadow, and now it was time to repay the debt. Counting carefully from the day he vanished and returned, it was nearly 10 years exactly. And his death, unbelievably, coincided with that very tradition. There is no death certificate. No one is sure where he is buried. 3 different locations all claim to be his resting place. 3 graves, 3 headstones, 3 stories. But wherever it is, his grave is simple. Just a bare patch of earth, a few stones shaped like a guitar, and dry flowers drooping over the marker. Music lovers still visit, placing their hands on the soil, as if hoping to hear the sound of the strings echoing from deep beneath the ground. Robert died at age 27, a number that later became symbolic. The 27 Club began with him, then continued with Hendrix, Joplin, Morrison, Cobain. They all departed at the same age, and people called it the Age of the Lost Soul. But Robert was the first, the initiator of the legend. A genius who burned brightly for a brief moment, then extinguished, leaving a fire burning perpetually in the hearts of his listeners. Those present that night recounted that when Robert drew his last breath, his face showed no fear. He smiled, his eyes wide open, as if seeing someone waiting in the darkness. Then his final breath escaped, light as the wind. A witness later said, "He left as sudden as he came, like a whisper swallowed by the wind." His guitar vanished that same day. No one knows if it was hidden, stolen, or buried with him. People searched everywhere, but only the recordings remained. 29 songs, each like a message, beautiful, haunting, and devastatingly sad. Among them, Hellhound on My Trail and Me and the Devil Blues sound like the wailing of a soul fleeing something invisible, both urgent and helpless. Robert Johnson's death did not close the legend, but opened it. People believed he paid the price, not just for his talent, but for his very human desire to transgress boundaries. The music he left behind, though only a few dozen tracks, still sends shivers down the spines of generations. Every time the slide guitar rings out, people say Robert's soul steps across the threshold of life and death, returning to play the rest of the Devil's tune. His name once disappeared from music, as if swept away by the final sounds in Hellhound on My Trail. No one mentioned Robert Johnson until Columbia Records coincidentally found the dusty recordings in a warehouse. When that guitar sound was played, people froze. His voice, raw, trembling, yet burning, echoed as if from the other world. Critics called it the music of a soul torn in two, and from that moment, Robert Johnson, the anonymous wanderer, came back to life. By the 1970s, his first 2 genuine photographs were found. A delicate face, deep eyes, a faint smile, starkly different from the spectral image people had conjured. The entire music world was stunned. They realized they had never truly known who Robert Johnson was. Eric Clapton said, "He rewrote the language of the guitar." Keith Richards claimed, "I thought he had 2 people playing at once." Bob Dylan stood silent for hours after first hearing him sing. All agreed, the greatest bluesman who ever lived. But while the world celebrated in Mississippi, an old woman was seeking justice for her nephew, Ms. Carrie Thompson. She heard Robert's music playing everywhere, records selling well, yet his family received nothing. After years of struggle, thanks to researcher Stephen Lav, Robert's inheritance. Rights were recognized, though the compensation received was meager. Then his maternal half-sister, Ms. Annie Anderson, continued the journey to protect that legacy. She said, "Robert didn't sell his soul. He sold his heart to the blues." That statement was like a conclusion to all the legends. Robert didn't sell his soul to the devil. He devoted his heart to music. The price he paid wasn't magic, but his youth, solitude, and eventual oblivion. In every song, one hears the sigh of the South, where black people only had music to express their innermost feelings. And that is what made the deal with the devil a metaphor, not a supernatural story, but a symbol of the desire to escape destiny, the pain of an artist who was unseen in life. Later research confirmed Robert's talent came from relentless practice, not mysticism. They found evidence that he practiced guitar until he bled, sitting alone every night, repeating every rhythm. The devil was actually the shadow in his soul, fear, loneliness, and a desire for perfection that bordered on self-destruction. Robert was quiet, humble, but every time he held the guitar, his eyes seemed to ignite. Listeners said that when he sang, his face seemed to dissolve into the music, both painful, beautiful, and distant. After decades, his true self gradually emerged, a passionate man, a solitary soul, a genius unrecognized while alive. The few recordings he left, just 29 songs, became the foundation for an entire century of music. From Clapton to the Rolling Stones, from Dylan to Hendrix, all were influenced. Love in Vain, his song, was covered by the Rolling Stones in 1969, leading to the famous copyright lawsuit that helped the Johnson family legally secure their inheritance. Though late, justice arrived, if only in a small part. But what remains even greater than fame and fortune is the truth. Robert Johnson was not the devil, nor was he a saint. He was human, a young man with a dream to overcome the shadow of poverty, prejudice, and fate. He exchanged everything so his music could touch eternity. Fame may fade, but the questions about the human spirit, about faith, passion, and the boundaries of admiration will endure. The story of Robert Johnson is not just a blues legend. It is proof of the price paid when one dares to touch their own limits. From the solitary guitar in the poor South to the haunting crossroads myth that gripped the world, Johnson left behind more than music. It is a question about belief, ambition, and solitude. He didn't sell his soul to the devil. He dedicated his heart to his art, and it is still beating in every note, every breath of those who listen. If you also feel the pain, the passion, and the melancholy beauty in this story, comment to share your feelings and subscribe to continue with me on this journey to discover the immortal souls in music. Those who lived, loved, and vanished with their own sound.
Thanks so much for sticking with us to the very end. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and hit that subscribe button so you won't miss any of our daily updates. Now feel free to check out some of our latest and most popular videos showing up on your screen. Goodbye, and see you in the next one.